We're down to the last section of the day, so thanks to so many of you for sticking with us and staying through the panel. I want to thank all our panelists for joining us back here on the stage again today. We've had, I think, so many nuggets of wisdom and so much information shared. I'm just really grateful to all of you for everything that you've shared with us today. And we have about 45 more minutes for some questions. So audience members, the best questions come from you. So please put those back in the poll EV and we will get to as many of them as we can. All right, so first I think we will start with, for each of you, and you come from different backgrounds, some of you are producers, some of you academia, some of you research. We'll start with you, Jay. What is one piece of practical advice you would give to someone just starting out in your field, like as a conservationist? What advice would you give? We got a microphone here. Is it on? Let's make sure.
Testing. We good?
We're good.
Okay. So the question was someone that would start out as a conservationist, right? And so I think there's always some tools to the trade. Mine, obviously, the spade is really hard to not use. I think there's a reluctance for someone who's not accustomed to it because they're not always sure what they're looking at. And that includes soil district personnel, NRCS personnel, that includes all of us. And it starts to make sense when you put your spade in the ground and you put that soil sample on the end gate, but then you go to the fence line and you take one out of the fence line, and then you go to the grassland, you take one out of the grassland, maybe go over to the garden, take one out of the garden, and you end up putting about 4 or 5 of them beside each other. You know, it's things like that that are simple, but they really help us understand and see, because just taking some soil from that one field and think you're going to understand everything that is or isn't happening in it is not realistic. And I think when we start looking at all those differences, then we start to write a story and we start to see our way. And so for people that start out as conservation planners, I think this is a great start, because I think it's feeling it, touching it, smelling it, seeing it, and after that, I think it's a matter of these comparisons and finding some system that works. I think it's a baseline start.
Great advice. Thanks, Jay. What about you, Stefan? Very interesting research you're doing. What kind of advice would you give to other people?
Yeah, I mean, the advice that I would give is kind of just stick with it. Don't give up, I think. Yeah, I think, because one thing in research is always, and I'm sure as farmers you'll experience that too, is that, you know, sometimes you're venturing into new areas. It's very hard. There may not be a lot of things known about it. Like, for instance, when, little backstory, when we started to try to study phytonutrients, that's professionally the hardest thing I've ever done, because there wasn't a lot to go off of. Didn't really know where to start, just had to sort of figure it out. So, and that can be, and so you'll run into a lot of, how do you say it, roadblocks. Things don't go right away. So it can be discouraging when you first start. So, but I think if you, don't give up, I think. Then if you don't give up, then you're already halfway there, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Mark?
I guess I would say really just like it's a constant process of finding like where your passion's at. I know I was really excited about winter growing when I started, as it felt like a miracle to be able to, like, you know, when everything else was at that like time of, what is it called, the starvation period in like March, when you don't have any storage crops left, and yet you did something in the fall where these like amazing, beautiful spinach is coming up and it tastes the sweetest that you've ever tasted, you know, and then like the passion for new flavors and textures, and then figuring out production models for those things and developing markets can be really exciting, and that could take any shape that you want. So have fun with it.
You know, when I was thinking about this, kind of a funny thing popped into my head, which was there used to be a crop consultant guy that kind of worked with regenerative stuff, and he made these videos we watched years and years ago, and I don't really remember much, but what I do remember is he used to be fond of saying, "See what you're looking at," and at the time I was like, okay, I'll try, I guess. But that actually has really stuck with me, and I feel like that's sort of a good guide. And as a farmer, I think that being quiet and walking, it's really hard. Sometimes you get really busy and you're just doing what you need to do. But taking the time to just walk and look and quiet, I try really hard to make sure to turn my phone off and just be in the space sort of and think about it and make sure, kind of ask that question, like, am I seeing what I'm seeing, or am I just kind of gliding, am I just looking at this, or am I seeing it? And I think that's helped me the most, of just really making sure you're taking the time to think about what you're looking at, because you can see a lot if you're paying attention, but you can also miss a lot. Yeah.
And Mary, can you answer your advice, especially from a woman in agriculture's perspective?
Ooh. Okay. Actually some interesting messages that I've retained over the years on women in agriculture. One of the most intriguing to me came from Norman Borlaug, who was known as the founder of the Green Revolution. And when he was talking, I read a speech he gave in the 1970s about how you transform the way people are approaching agriculture, because in those days they were trying to get people to adopt conventional means. Now we're trying to get people to go back to the pre-conventional means. But he was talking about the psychological factor and the fact that demonstration plots are valuable and that you have to find your community leaders. And in the 1970s, long before I was told, I'm never going to recommend a woman for a job in agriculture, he was saying that women are the leaders of agricultural transformation. And I look at what, and he had worked all over the world, and he was basically advising people at a time when women had a lot less freedom than we have today, to listen to what these women are saying, because they're the ones that are going to bring about change. And I think about what I've seen in the last 5 to 6 years as I've talked with different groups. And it often, I've seen men and women doing great things in the regenerative ag field. And so I really hate to put people in boxes, but I do see a lot of leadership coming from the women in agriculture.
Great, thank you. So I want to ask, maybe we'll go back to Jason here, and we'll ask all of you if you feel compelled to share. Jason, what motivates you to keep going? What motivates you to get up every day and keep moving forward and staying in ag in Boulder County?
That's a question I should have thought of before. Seems like that should be easy to answer, but I don't know. I feel like everything I've ever done in my life, and I've had some other jobs and things, and farming is the most connected thing I've ever done. And for me, that sort of connectedness, I guess, is what makes it work when it's not fun, because there's definitely times when it's not fun. And there's definitely times when you think, oh my God, what are we doing? We're going crazy here. But I think that connectedness really makes me, brings me back. And that's really kind of the core answer. But I think additionally, I think there's tremendous possibility in agriculture. And I really think that a lot of our biggest problems, we have a lot of power in ag to really make important changes. And I think that's exciting. And when I read about different changes, I read about solutions, and we so often think about, we hear about these pharmaceutical advancements and all these industrial projects and stuff. And I think, there's things to be learned from all those things. But at the end of the day, when I look at advancements, like from an environmental standpoint, advancements we make on farm, we have a chance to really do things in a natural way. And to me, that feels a lot truer. And so I think that's exciting for me is there's endless challenges. And so, being a farmer is really fantastic because you can learn every single day. And you're not going to run out of things to learn.
Thanks, Jason. Mark, have you found your passion?
Again and again. I was thinking about how when I have a really difficult day, oftentimes a past version of myself has kind of given a gift to a future version of myself. And so when things get really hard, then I look up and I see that coming down the line is something that we set in motion 3 months or 6 months or 3 years ago. And so there's an opportunity to just let go of whatever was hard in that current moment and then embrace this amazingness that's showing up or is right on the horizon. So always give gifts to your future self, plant seeds.
Thank you. Stefan, what keeps you motivated?
Well, I'm very excited about just learning about food. So, and then that's like what I said earlier. I kind of want to know it's for selfish reasons. So that's what motivates me. I'm really excited about that. And then another thing is also, I think, is it is hard work, and you, like you said, it's really interesting always to interact with producers such as yourself, because it seems like a lot of challenges, hardships, constantly learning. That's what science is as well. So I guess in many respects, you're all scientists as well. But also just not, once things get really hard, I tend to double down and want to solve it. So instead of walking away from it. So I think that's, maybe a character trait, but that's also what keeps me motivated. Is that maybe the other thing that motivates me is that I don't like to fail. Maybe that's also another thing. I don't know if that's a good motivation or not, but it works. So
I think that kind of works for all of us a little bit. That's a strong human aspect, but I like that one. So I think for myself, it's such an interconnected system. A good friend of mine always told me, he said, Jay, we should have went into rocket science, because if you know the energy formula, he said, then after that, it gets kind of straightforward. But he said in agriculture, with all this connection, you are constantly looking at another aspect or trying to separate out something or tease out an answer is really difficult. And one of those actually occurred for me in Colorado. A couple of years ago, I think I noticed on your screen earlier, Brendan Rocky was one of your speakers. And so I've known him for a long time. And he was always inviting me to stop out. He said, you and Kathy need to stop back out. He said, I made a lot of changes since you were here last. And he said, come on out. So 2 summers ago, we drive to Center. I think that's the name of it. Center, Colorado, not too far from Alamosa. And that evening, we take some tables and some white tablecloths and all the food, and we put them in the middle of this potato irrigation pivot with the potatoes. I wouldn't do that in North Dakota. But we had dinner out there that evening because of how he grows potatoes and how he's removed most of the impacts out of it from the viewpoint of anything that's toxic. In North Dakota, the way we grow them with our elevation, verticillium wilt is always a concern, and so a soil sterilant the fall before, so you kill all the biology, and then you put a clock in place about roughly every 10 days. You put on pesticide throughout the growing season, and then at the end of that, you consume the potato. And so that's not what we're really looking for. And the way Brendan grows potatoes is, and it was a surreal feeling that day that of what can be. And I think those type things for a conservationist, that's really hard to beat.
Thanks, Jay. Mary, have you had a chance to think about what motivates you to keep going? Keep doing the good work?
Sorry, I thought I was off and I wasn't. You know, some of it goes into, in fact, I'm going to circle back because I got thrown off a little bit on the diversity question, and I realized that, you know, what I really think is that it's important. If we need biodiversity, we need diversity of thinking too. And we can't be a single group attacking this problem. I don't care if it, you know, I don't want to see all women farmers out there. But where it ties back in is that the best piece of advice I got starting out, or that I could give to people, actually came to me when I was in graduate school from a biochemistry professor who really pushed us to not get so focused on the latest new technology and take some time to read the old classic papers. And I think what we find as we move into regenerative ag is that a lot of this was known in the past, and had we read some of that old stuff, it would be there. And I think as I came to appreciate that, I started looking at my own family and kind of what got me to where I was. And despite the fact that, you know, in some ways I had this real novel childhood growing up the way that I did, but my family moved a lot and we became very disconnected as a family, and there was a lot of what we might call dysfunction. And so as I started raising my own kids, I was working very hard to keep that dysfunction from repeating across the generations, because we know that tends to repeat itself. And so what motivates, and so the day I realized all of this was connected, even the dysfunction, you know, I had several family members struggled with addictions. We all struggled with dietary issues. So much of this went back to food and family and culture. And I realized I wanted, you know, I grew up without grandparents, and I didn't have that connection. And then my kids grew up without real close connections to my parents. And I thought, I don't want another generation without grandparents, because I think it's so hard to keep that information flow to the past. And I don't want my children to have a harder life than I had, and my grandchildren to have a harder life than I had. And I think there are answers to so many of our day-to-day problems, socially, culturally, economically, and our health problems that can be found in regenerative ag. I know it's not a magic bullet, but I think it's the core of many of the struggles we have in society. And so what keeps me going forward is to see my children have a better life than I had.
I can relate. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, question from the audience. Stefan, this one is specific to your research. Do the results described regarding nutrient density in diverse pastures also apply to grazing rangelands?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when we're using the term pasture, and I know that pasture, we think of something that's more planted as opposed to a rangeland that's more native. But yes, it holds up there as well. Yep.
Okay, follow-up question. So how do we do this while minimizing overgrazing, erosion, destruction of biological crusts, et cetera, all the bad things that can happen when you graze?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's management. It comes back to management, right? Like, I mean, we work with producers for instance, in western rangelands, which are very brittle. Yeah, if you turn your cows out on pasture or pasture on the rangeland in May and you collect them again in October, that's not really proper management, right? But we're also working with producers that really purposefully graze. And in that case, they're seeing benefits on ecosystem, seeing maybe, wildlife habitat, wildlife return, work with a producer that's, so beavers pop up on their property. So when we often think about this, and especially in the case of Western rangelands here too, right, with the grazing exclusion, and you see an improvement, but in my view, or also from looking at the literature, a lot of that benefit is because it was grazed really poorly, and therefore you see these improvements. But I've also seen many examples where grazing and wildlife restoration and habitat can be improved simultaneously. Yeah.
Thank you. Jason or Jay, anything else you want to add about proper grazing management?
So I still like to see, I still think we're, as I made the comment earlier, we're generally speaking very understocked. And it kind of goes back to the elevator speech, but sometimes if I'm stuck in an elevator with a rancher, I'll ask him if he's ever confined his livestock on that unit for one night. So he's put them into an enclosure for one night out in the middle of that rangeland. And after that, lock them out of there and then observe it. And so that gives you confidence sometimes about what animal impact can do and what management can do. You actually see it then, and it's pretty simple, no cost other than your labor. And so those are all things that I think make this impact happen. And I think the livestock on the land, when we're talking soil regeneration, it doesn't start out as the most important thing for a lot of operators, but a lot of times it ends up as being one eventually.
Yeah, I think those are both great answers. And I guess I would add, I said earlier, you got to see what you're looking at. And I think that, we have to guard against sort of putting labels on things and then not thinking it through. And that's always kind of a risk. We say, okay, grazing's good, so therefore grazing's good. Well, we have to be willing to stop, really think it through, and we have to make sure, are we using this good label to avoid thinking about what we're doing, or are we really thinking about what we're doing? Because, grazing to me, it's a tool, just like a lot of other tools, and just like every other tool in the world. It's only as good as the person using it. And so, I think that it comes down to management and making sure that we're thinking through the whole picture and making sure that management is actually doing what we want to do with that grazing, because it certainly can go the other way as easily as it can go well.
Okay, thank you. Switching gears a little bit, Mark, specific question for you from the audience. Where do you find your esoteric seeds?
I love supporting seed keepers and breeders. And so, if I have something I want to grow, I'll just do a search for it. And I probably work with 12 or 14 different seed companies. And different people have different passions in seed growing as well. So it's pretty amazing, similar to talking about like sending resources towards a biochemist or a worm farmer or a compost maker, to be able to send resources to seed growers too, because there's definitely unique considerations there. But yeah, it really just comes down to a Google search. Sorry, but it's cool because then you can just grow whatever you want, basically. I always check into, where is the seed coming from, and usually it has a really great story of how, who's tending to it. And we don't keep too much seed ourselves. I have this wonderful Calabrian chili seed that I grow out every year that was given to me by a friend when I was in New Mexico who used to go over to southern Italy every year to stay with her grandma. But for the most part, we have our focus on production. We also keep perennial seeds as well and gather them and then propagate them around the farm. But yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, next question. I'm thinking maybe Jay and Mary, if you want to answer this one, or maybe one of you can cover it. Could you explain, how do soil aggregates form and how do we encourage their development?
I wonder if we'll have the same answers. So a couple of things. If you imagine all these loose, small soil particles, a lot of plant and microbial activity goes into building those aggregates, okay? Bacteria release a lot of polysaccharides that literally act like glue. If you see bacteria on a petri dish, they're real sticky and gooey because they excrete all these polysaccharides. Plant roots do similar things. They're excreting a lot of carbon compounds, a lot of food for microbes to attract these bacteria that leave the glue everywhere. And they're extracting some of their own polysaccharides. So you've got all these carbon products going into the soil. And then to kind of bind it all together, you have fungi, and you saw these long strands they form. And they're basically like nets. They'll branch and wrap these hyphae around the soil clusters. And so you've got them all glued together and then little bundles tied around it. And that's what's holding your soil together.
Yeah, Mary's got it.
Do I pass?
Yeah, you passed with flying colors, and when we started planting combination cover crops, we always saw that we had some of those species were capable of doing that on a fibrous root. Those of you know who David Brandt was, kind of soil health advocate, Ohio. There was this kind of famous picture of him. He was a very large man, and he had this huge radish root, and it was white. There was no soil aggregate on it, right? Because it's not the type plant that's going to build much of an aggregate. And then there were others that would be maybe a small grain, or Italian ryegrass is really good for it, or cereal rye. And you dig it up carefully and you will find them coated on that root mass on the rhizosphere, functioning as Mary just said. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Jason, Mark, I feel like I'm putting you on the spot, and that's not my intention, but
Sorry.
if you were each given $100,000 to spend on your operation, no strings attached, what would you spend it on?
I'd probably go to Paris and think about it. No, that's not true. We're really, I've become really obsessed. I say passionate about, my wife might say obsessed. It's kind of a fine line. But we're really interested in methane in cattle. That's kind of what we've been thinking about for a couple of years. And this grew out of, when we started this grazing program, we started looking for some easy answers. And I didn't know they were easy answers. I thought they were easy answers. They're not. And so we kind of searched high and low for somebody that could tell us, I was just looking for some equations of like, how do we know, this much carbon goes into a cow, this much carbon gets breathed out, this much carbon gets burped out. Seems pretty simple. And so I ended up kind of going down a rabbit hole and becoming more and more educated in this. And what I've come to realize is it's not simple at all. It's quite complicated, and the answer depends dramatically based on what that animal's eating at any given time, the temperature. I was telling Mary I met a professor from Tennessee, and he was doing genetic research, and he said, what they find is that within a given herd of cows that look the same, you might have all Angus cows, you might have 50% variability at any given moment of who's creating more methane. And we talked a lot this morning, and carbon kept coming up. I heard carbon a lot of times. I have a little bell that goes off in my head, and it came up quite a bit. And so for me, when I look at kind of the beef industry and farming in general and the environment in general, I think, this is a really key thing that we need to understand better. And it's not really good enough to sort of have a vast or a general sweeping understand. We actually need to get to the point where we can look at our cows in our management and what we're feeding those cows right now and get some answers on how that changes. Because the reality is, methane's created in microbes. The cows don't really create the microbes. They just have a big bag full of they don't create methane. They have a big bag full of microbes that create methane. And that's affected dramatically by what they eat. And so if I had the money, that's what we would like to invest in, is how do we monitor that? Because until we can really monitor that in real time in some kind of fashion that we can see the effects, then we can look at, how do these different crop mixes affect that? And I think, for me, that's probably the most powerful question that I can think of that I'd like to answer. So that's what I would do.
So you're going to fund Stefan's lab to do some more research.
He's welcome to come out. I'd love to talk.
Mark, what are you thinking about on your farm?
Well, I'd put a portion of it towards the skid steers. We don't have a machine on the farm to move materials around, so do a lot of that by hand. I'd get another cart because production took over my cart that I would love to be able to drive around on and do things around the farm. I'd go shopping for plants. Because I'm a bit of a shopaholic when it comes to plant material. And I would just not hold back, just order more and more plants, and then we'd find a good home for them and take care of them. And then the proverbial one person short, I would bring an extra person on in the main season. That should be it. That's a good $100,000 budget right there.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Stefan, another specific question towards your research. So you talked a lot about cattle. Is there similar research on sheep or lambs?
Yes, but there's less on sheep and lamb and goats. Love to do more on that. We've historically, more of that work was done overseas, outside of North America, because it is in other places more popular. But I mean, the idea holds up. And actually, an interesting story about like what we're seeing in goat and lamb, and not a knock on cattle, but the phytonutrients are quite a bit higher in those animals because of the plants that they select. Because goats and sheep would often select more what we think of shrubs and forbs and quote-unquote weeds, right? Which are usually weeds because they propagate, because they're very rich in secondary metabolites. So we see that those are typically becoming enriched in there. Not to say that cattle has some other benefits, and typically the omega-3s are a little bit higher, and some other nutrients as well. But in terms of the phytonutrients, and you see those becoming very much enriched. And I would also like to see more work on that. And I know it's easy for me to say because I am not the one managing them, but in terms of there's such large body of literature about the benefits of multi-species grazing, ecological benefits, as well as the ability to graze a wider variety of plants, right? As cattle might not select some plants that sheep and goats may select. Probably potential to produce more food per pound acre, but I can definitely understand the economics and the management perspective of that. But yeah, just I think something to think about, because I not to go on a rant, but sometimes I think about this living out in the West where there's not a lot of water, and I drive through northern Arizona and I take the corner into a valley and everything's green in the middle of the desert. I'm always wondering, like, how long can we do that? And can we still graze there? Yes, but maybe it would have to be local, more, well, perhaps different species, or not to say some cattle breeds can also be adapted to that, but I think those are things that we think about the future to keep in mind. And maybe that would mean that we'd look more at other species as well, because we see that a lot of producers are using goats, for instance, for brush control, for fire control, and as lamb as well. And maybe if we can find a market for people to consume, that would be a good idea. Yeah.
So sometimes we have speakers from places where it rains a lot more, but this is actually maybe 1 year where we don't. So we have New Mexico and Colorado and North Dakota. So how do we, sometimes it's a little more tough, I think, to implement things, like you were just saying, in places where there is less water and it's a little more brittle. So what are your thoughts, I'll start with you, Mary, on getting people to understand what is possible based on the environment that they're in?
So that we stop growing water-rich crops in water-poor climates.
Whatever your take is, yeah. Or asking farmers in place to do things that maybe aren't possible in a place. Maybe it looks good on Instagram in Ohio, but maybe it's not going to work here.
Right. And it's funny because it seems to me like the farmers I know that are in practice have a pretty good sense of what's working and what's not. Here, I think there's a general sense that we need to look for more water tolerant crops. And I worry that the eyes are cast on technology. We're going to breed better crops into it when we have dozens of untapped, hundreds of untapped native plants that were once parts of the diet and could be selected and cultured and grown as part of the diet. I see some little rays of hope in some of the ag experiment stations that are looking at native plants and medicinal plants and this kind of thing. And I see a lot of small market garden places that are looking at the same ideas and introducing people to the food. I used to kind of tease when I was at the Jornada that what we really needed in order to restore the grasses to the rangeland was an Eat Mesquite campaign. Because if you look back, and we had the aerial photos and historical vegetation surveys to prove that really the mesquite that has become so problematic in the Chihuahuan Desert and taken over so much grassland was brought in along the cattle trails. And it was always there, but 300 and 400 years ago, those trails were populated by the Apache trading with the Piro down in the river valleys. And so they were like the Pickwicks that stop at these little clusters of mesquite that harvest their protein from the mesquite, that build a fire with the wood. And those mesquite clusters were contained. Of course, once cattle started moving through and we made sure that people did not have the access to the land that they once had, and changed a lot of the land ownership dynamics, this pattern was stopped, and now the cattle start open range grazing and spreading that mesquite all over the place. And we're still seeing the continued encroachment today that was initiated because landscapes don't reverse quickly once you change the direction. So I don't know, did I answer? I think we need to get people open, and maybe it's the chefs and the culinary arts that will bring this. Get people more in tune with what some native plant and dry land plant possibilities are, because there are a lot of species out there that would have a lot of good health and nutrition value that we're not using.
That's a tough question, and I think I'm a little bit lucky because as a farmer, I get to sort of pass because I get to focus on just my area, and I'm kind of, water's been sort of the focus of my life since the get-go, because really farming here, it was bred into us that water's everything. I mean, water irrigating is what I did as a kid. I hated it. Now I love it. I actually, one of my first jobs is I used to get dropped off in a field with a shovel, and we didn't have cell phones then, and I just thought, oh, this is terrible. Now I think, man, give me a shovel, no phone. I'll see you tonight. Sounds okay to me. But the one thing I will say is water is really hyper-local. And I don't just mean like in the region or the county. I mean, Mark's farm is like 2 miles from ours, and he has a different water situation than we do. And so I think this comes back to kind of what I talked about earlier, which is we really need to pay attention to the people that understand the system. Because I don't understand the system in another place. I don't have the first idea how New Mexico works. And so that hyper-local, if we lose that, I think we kind of crash the bus. So that would be my answer.
Water? What? That's the question? Water? So I always love that 20,000, I say 27,000 gallons per 1% of organic matter. I think we were at like 2.5% when we arrived at our property, and then any of the land that we've started working within 2 years was up over 5. So that provides us with a degree of resilience, and then different strategies of managing water to create this kind of oasis effect has kind of been, I don't know, just like our little solution. But I really resonate with what Mary said, because we have such strange expectations for what is a product or what we should be eating. It doesn't really take a lot of research to find that there's, numerous cultural contexts around the world for all of the plants that are around us that are edible, and that we've chosen this very small quantity of plants that we are identifying as food, which is absurd. And so really, like, there's these standout moments in that, like, where foraging and farming kind of like merge for me, where I like the sense of like, why don't we, take a different perspective on what is valuable. And this relates to Stefan's research and phytonutrients and James Duke's phytochemical and ethnobotanical database. And in fact, we don't know these plants anymore, and we need to be reacquainted with them. And they have got so much to teach us, and they can nourish us in so many ways. And it's a local and a global, like, collision melee of potential. Postmodernism, it is here. Like, we can appropriate responsibly and then incorporate that. When I think of, like, quelites, refers to over 5,000 wild greens that are edible. And there's a conference every year in Mexico City. I've never gone, I want to go. But 5,000 wild greens that we could be eating. Like, it's just, the potential is just immense. So stay open, I guess, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we are running out of time, so we're going to go to my very last question. Hopefully it's easy. Okay, we'll start, Mary, at the end.
Okay.
If you could you sum up today in one word?
Oh, gosh. Really gratifying.
I would say inspiring.
Water.
Yeah. One word. Oh, I guess that's difficult. No, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm also very grateful, but that word was already said. But no, yeah, all of the above. I know it's 4 words. Okay.
Hope.
All right, help me thank our panelists one more time.